Today's video is all about weapon attachment tuning. So this is a new feature that's been introduced in Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2.0. Basically, once you get a gun to max level, some of the attachments have this option above them to tune the weapon, and there's a vertical and a horizontal slider, and you can see there's a stat on top and bottom, a stat on left and right, and basically you can tune your weapon between those two stats and kind of push it towards which stats you want more for whatever you're building. So this adds a huge new level of complexity to building weapons, and nobody's really gone super in depth into investigating how this works. So there's a few questions I wanted to answer in this video, and the first one was how much is the actual tuning affecting the weapon? Is it dramatic? Is it a very small amount? I also wanted to answer whether or not these are stacking like additively. So in the past, if you had an attachment that helped your ADS time by 10%, if you had another attachment that also did 10%, you wouldn't just get 20% better ADS time. You would get basically 10% times 10%, so 1.1 times 1.1, and you would get that final percentage, which was actually better than just a 10% help, or it just worked multiplicatively for multiple stats. So I wanted to see if these sliders, when you increase the slider all the way up, if that stacks multiplicatively with the other attachments that are on there, things like that. And then the third question, which was really the big one, is are these linear? And what I mean by that is if you drag this slider all the way to the right on aiming idle stability, is that exactly twice as much as halfway to aiming idle stability? Because if you look at the actual radar plot in the center, you'll see that sometimes they seem to change in weird ways you wouldn't expect. It looks non-linear as you're sliding it. So that was one of the big things I wanted to figure out today, was whether or not these are just a direct linear correlation with these stats. And we got some good stuff in here. So let's jump into it and we'll start looking at the numbers. So I'm going to answer the first and second question at once, and that is whether or not they work on like a multiplicative basis. If the effect gets worse if you have worse ADS time, or if the effect is lessened if you have less ADS time, as well as just the overall magnitude. So I just looked at the FPSKrieger for this video. That is an underbarrel, basically a commando foregrip. That's what I showed in the intro to the video as well. And I did a bunch of different testing to see how this worked out. So we've got the Lockman 556 with the FPSKrieger with no tuning at all. It was the only attachment on the weapon. When you tune it for ADS, I got 267 versus no tuning, 279. So that's 12 milliseconds faster. So pretty small amount there. That's less than 1 frame at 60 FPS. That's 3 frames at 240 FPS. So the error in my measurements in these tests is usually plus or minus like 4 milliseconds, because that's 1 frame at 240 FPS. The tests are very consistent and repeatable, but there's always going to be like 1 frame of error, because if you think about it, if the animation starts in between frames or something, like 4 milliseconds is as good as I'll ever be able to do at 240 FPS. So keep that in mind with these numbers. It could be plus or minus 4 from the value that's measured. So tuned for minus ADS, I got 283. So that increased by 4 milliseconds over no tuning. And then what I did was I took that same attachment, the FPSKrieger, same tunings, and I added all the ADS slowing attachments that I could. So I gave it the slowest ADS time I possibly could, and then I did the same tuning so I could see. Usually we would see in this case that the effect would be amplified because it was a multiplier. So it would base off of whatever the other attachment's ADS time was, and you can see that the numbers are basically the same here. So I got minus 9 milliseconds. So again, that's within the plus or minus 1 frame at 240 of error. And then for the tuned to hurt your ADS, I got plus 8. So again, that's within the plus or minus 1 of the first test. So immediately that tells us, since our base ADS time was more than double and the effect was roughly the same, that it's additive. So I'm pretty sure these stats are additive here. They don't multiply into the attachment values like we had before. It's just a static number based on whatever curve the slider actually has. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Then I did the same thing just again to confirm here. So I did the same exact thing, FPSKrieger, but then with full ADS reducing attachments. So this is the fastest ADS time I could give this gun. And you can see again, we're basically within that plus or minus 1 frame. This one is 2 frames off of that initial tuned for ADS value, but every now and then there could be a little bit more error than that in the testing. But overall, I think this pretty much confirms that it just stacks linearly off of the individual attachment. A couple other quick stats I want to cover here that I also tested. So I did the same thing with the FPSKrieger and ADS time again, except I tuned every attachment on the gun to help with ADS. And then I also tuned them all to hurt ADS, just because I wanted to see the magnitude of how this was affecting things. And you can see no tuning, 663 again, that's within one frame of what I got before, 667. And then when I tuned them all for ADS, I got minus 25 milliseconds. Tuned them all to hurt ADS, I got plus 41. So again, I think it's just a straight additive value, and I think each attachment that I tuned added a little bit more or subtracted a little bit more from the ADS time. Then I also wanted to look at ADS movement, because the FPSKrieger, one of the sliders, it's between ADS time and ADS movement, or maybe it's between ADS movement and aiming idle stability, but we'll talk about the aiming sway here in a second. But I wanted to test these and see how they came out. So first of all, the attachment only says it hurts walking speed, so I would have assumed that was just movement speed. But then in the actual sliders, we see ADS movement as one of the options. So that kind of is a hint there that ADS movement for this attachment was a hidden stat. And you can see that in fact it was. So the base weapon was 2.42 millisecond or meters per second. And these are super accurate. I can get movement speeds like easily within 0.01 meters per second consistently. Just because it's dependent on how far you walk, it's more accurate. So I can get really accurate numbers here. With no tuning and the FPSKrieger attached, you see you get 0.06 reduced off your base weapon, so that is a hidden stat on this weapon. But then if you tune it, so if you tune it for ADS movement, you get plus 0.1, so it goes from basically 2.36 to 2.464, 2.46. So that's a nice increase there. That's pretty significant. Actually, you can get it back above the base weapon's ADS movement. And if you tune it for a reduction, you get minus 0.6 meters per second. So again, it appears that it's just straight addition or subtraction of the value that's calculated based on the slider position. Okay, so on to the crazier stuff here. So this, I wanted to also check the aiming stability. This is something that I've developed basically using the same tools I use for visual recoil. I can track the position of the reticle, track the position of the wall behind the reticle, and then I can get full, basically aim sway information from that. So this is a little example of what that looks like. So basically I'm tracking the reticle on the red dot, tracking the bullet hole on the wall. This gives me the two components of sway, which is the background swaying around, and then the reticle sways around on top of that. The gun has a little bit of shake and wobble on top of that. So from this, I can get all that information. But then if we actually look at the values that I got from this is where stuff gets pretty weird. So with no tuning at all, this is the average amplitude of the sway in X and Y direction. So I can look at each component of the sway, up and down, left and right, and get the amplitude from that using the same stuff I talked about in my visual recoil video. So 38 was my no tune X amplitude, and then I tuned it all the way to have better aim sway. I got basically 30, so pretty significant reduction there from 38 down to 30 in terms of amplitude. It's unitless, basically. I don't have a unit for that. It's just the amount that it moved, so it is like a distance. There's no unit attached to it. And then when I tuned it all the way for worse sway, I actually still saw better average amplitude. So I got 35.6 from this, which was a reduced amplitude from no tuning at all, even though it said it was going to make it worse on the slider, because it was all the way the opposite direction. It actually got a little bit better. And then you see that consistently throughout here. So the better aim sway was always the best. So 25 down to 20 in the Y direction, but then the worst aim sway was still better than the default, only by a little bit this time. But then if you look at the crosshair sway as well, so that's I was tracking the crosshair in the middle of the screen. I can do X and Y amplitude of that as well. So 13.5 with no tuning, a little bit under 10 with the best aim sway, and then 11.8 with the worst aim sway. And saw the same trend again with the Y direction. It was quite a bit less with the better aim sway, and then just a little bit better with the worst aim sway. So even though I'm selecting the slider or putting the slider all the way to the opposite direction of helping aim sway, it still was better than the default. So you might be saying, well, that's got to be error or something. Well, that's of course my first thought as well, is that I screwed something up, or maybe it was error. So I went back in and redid this like multiple times, and I get the same answer every single time. So that confused me. Like this is kind of trying to answer that linearity question. Is it really just a linear, like the middle value is just the default value, and then as you go up, it increases that stat and decreases the other stat, and as you go down, it does the opposite? This is already telling me that that's not how that works. As I'm going through this, I just want to remind you guys to don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, comment on the video. I put my heart and soul into this work for you guys to try to help the community out and get the best information out there that I can. So if you want to help support me, that'd be really appreciated. But let's get back into it. We'll start talking about frequencies. So there's also another component to aim sway, which is the frequencies. So it's basically so there's two things that are important with aim sway. Obviously, it's like the magnitude, how far it's swaying. And then the other one is how fast it's swaying. Because if it's swaying really slowly, it's really not a problem. But if it's swaying super fast, then that's a big issue. So there's two components that they can tweak with the different aim stability attachments. So I also calculated the frequencies of the different sway components. So basically used MATLAB, went in there, did the fast Fourier transform, got the frequencies out of the sway. A lot of math work there, took a long time, but again, we saw the same exact trend here. So there's multiple components to this. So the background sway, so this is like behind the gun, how the background's swaying around. X value was always a period of 10.5 seconds. Y value with no tune was 6.5. Y value with the best aim sway was 7.2. So we want a higher number here. We want sway to be slower. So we want the period to be longer. So 7.2 is quite a bit longer than 6.5 in terms of seconds. And then also with the worst aim sway, same trend again. We saw 6.8 seconds here, just a little bit longer than no tune. So it's actually better sway again, looking at the background. And then if we move on to the crosshair, crosshair actually has two components that I was able to see in the Fourier transform. So there's two peaks in the frequency plot, but only for the X direction. It's weird. There's nothing in the Y. There's only one in the Y that I can see at least. But yeah, we saw the same trend here. X was the same across no tune, better sway, worse sway. But then better was quite a bit better. And then worse was still better than no tuning. So same thing here. Really, really weird that these appear to be completely non-linear. I think there's some sort of custom tuned curve for each attachment, for each slider. So everyone that's building these guns on Twitter and everywhere else, and they're saying, oh, all the way to the side's the best choice. I don't think that's true. I think there's going to be points within the slider that will be better. And like I said, you can actually see this. So if I open this up, I go to a private match, create a private match, and then I go to the weapon sliders, you can actually see this happening. So watch the mobility point here on this graph as I move this from left to right. So it gets a little bit better, and then it gets worse for a second. It gets worse. And it's kind of freezing on me here, but you can see it's happening at like a different rate, and sometimes it even reverses direction. So as I'm increasing aim walking speed, sliding this to the left, my mobility is getting better, and then it gets worse for a second. So all the way to the left, it actually got a little bit worse. And I'm assuming mobility is it has like multipliers of all the different movement stats, including aim walking speed. So yeah, I think these curves are completely non-linear. I think they're arbitrary between the different weapons, the different attachments. So basically, having optimized builds is pretty much impossible without having data mined information for how this works. So I can't do that. I would love to help the people that can do that. But yeah, basically this investigation has led me to believe that there are different points throughout this slider that it's not just perfectly linear. So all the way to the side is not going to be the best choice always, like everyone seems to think. Another quick example of how it's pretty clear this is some sort of non-linearity. So watch the handling bar. So right here, this point right above my pointer right now, if you watch this as I move this slider, watch how it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. It's like, it's not linear at all. So it's getting worse there, getting worse, getting better faster. It wobbles around. So it's very clear that it's like a non-linear curve of how these are balancing these stats out, which is just super odd to me. But they basically took a system that was already complex, even if it was linear, and made it even more complex. Obviously, I didn't test a bunch of different attachments for this. It's just because this was a very long and tedious process to even go through one attachment and try to figure all this stuff out. But I think I've got some really good information for the community out of this. And we are still going to be testing this and trying to figure it out. And potentially the data mine numbers will come out relatively soon. Again, I'd love to help with that. I've offered, but we'll see how that works out. But again, difficult video to make. If you appreciate all the work I put into this, subscription to the channel would be appreciated. Drop a like on the video, drop a comment on the video letting me know what you think about this system. I actually think it's pretty cool. I wish the information was provided to us so we actually knew what was going on. Like, it makes no sense to make a super ridiculously complicated system and then tell no one about it. So like, we have no information about this. Obviously the game's been out for what, like 3 weeks at this point, 4 weeks at this point, and nobody's really talked about this non-linearity, so people didn't even know about it. And I just think that's a little crappy as a developer to make this complex, cool system and then not tell us about it and not explain it at all. But yeah, if you appreciate the content, don't forget to subscribe. See you guys in the next one.